In this week's In-Ear Insights, let's talk about declaring amnesty, specifically analytics amnesty. And this is a topic that has come up again and again with regards to things like change management and helping organizations make a transformation from being sort of data curious to data driven. Analytics amnesty means you declare a point in time when you say, hey, we're making all these big changes to our people, to our processes, to our platforms. And we're going to agree that everything that has happened before, we're no longer going to rely on, and we're not going to blame anybody at all for how things used to be set up. We're starting fresh. Katie, you love to say, today's a great day to get started with something new. And this concept of amnesty, though, I think it has to be the flip side of today's a great day, because it means we also have to say today's a great day to say we're not going to hold you accountable for the way things used to be because we know it was wrong. Do you want to talk more about how this relates to change management?
Absolutely. And, that point that you're driving home, the no blaming, is really going to be the measure of success. So in regards to change management, I mean, even if you're doing something like this, where it feels like it's only data focused, you still have to factor in things like, well, what's the purpose of it? Why are you suddenly making this change in your data? Who are the people involved? Not just the people who are changing the data, but the people who would be impacted by the changes in data. So what is the communication plan around the data changing? That's the piece that's most often missed, is letting people know what's happening and why. And then the process that you're going to go through, not just the process of changing the data, but the process of rolling out the new normal of data. How are you going to let customers know? How are you going to let board members know, stakeholders know, people all the way down, to, the front desk and operations managers know? Because when you make a change like this, there's going to be widespread, impact. And then you have the platforms themselves. Is it just one platform? Is it multiple platforms? Are there integrations you need to factor in? Who's going to be responsible for the data quality? And then the performance, which is, what is your measure of success? How do you know that you did the thing? And again, this is not just about the data itself being better quality and more correct, but it's about everybody getting on board. A measure of success is that everybody is on board with the plan and agrees to the plan and sticks to the plan. And so for example, Chris, let's say you and I realize that our Google Analytics has been set up incorrectly for the past 4 years. And, all of the numbers that we've been reporting on to our board or, to potential investors have been completely incorrect. We make a plan to fix it. We communicate it. But 6 months down the line, I decide, you know what? This was all Chris's fault. I'm just going to have to find a new co-founder. That means that the plan failed because I did not stick to the plan that I agreed with in terms of this analytics amnesty.
So how do you, because that's a people problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is 100% a dealing with people and their sticky, gooey emotions and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How do you create that plan in a way that's going to succeed? Because it is entirely possible. Like, I was looking at our Google Analytics 4 account the other day. We set that up the day it came out. Mm-hmm. And I have not kept up with it. I went back in a couple weeks ago and fixed a whole bunch of things. How do you create that analytics amnesty plan so that it succeeds, so that we're not playing the blame game?
It starts with a lot of discovery. And so really trying to figure out what really happened. And so, you're not a crime scene detective. You're not looking for the suspect, and you're not looking to bring someone to trial. And this is hard. I'm just going to preface this with, this is a really difficult thing to do. And it's why not a lot of companies are successful in doing this. Is you have to remove emotion from the discovery process. You have to remove people from the discovery process in terms of finding out what happened. So if we're going through this exercise for ourselves and we say, okay, Google Analytics 4 was set up incorrectly, as I'm putting together the information of what happened, nowhere in that account can I say, Chris messed this up, or Chris didn't know what he was doing, or, you know, Chris was going through it too quickly and wasn't paying attention. I actively need to remove you from the conversation and really talk about it in terms of the system was set up in this way. Trust Insights knew this much about the system at that time. Here are the things that have changed about that system, and really keep it almost kind of cold and emotionless in order to protect the people, which feels like a lot of work. But, you know, the bigger the organization gets, the more it's going to be like, okay, well, Joe didn't do this, and Susan didn't do that, and Bettina did this, and, you know, Jose did that. And it's like, none of that is productive at all. It's a really hard exercise to do. And it's why a lot of companies bring in outside consultants like Trust Insights to do that kind of work, because we don't have that emotional investment in the thing. Obviously, we want to see people succeed, but we weren't there, so we don't have the emotion and the backstory and even some of the politics. We're not involved in that stuff.
But how do you know, let's say you have a stakeholder named Bob, right?
Sure.
And Bob says, you know, right up front, okay, I need you guys to come in and you know, tell us what's wrong and fix it. Tell me who I need to fire.
Mm-hmm.
How do you change Bob's point of view to eliminate that last part, to say like, yeah, you know what, that's probably not the most productive way to handle the situation. Let's maybe think about that a little bit differently.
Well, I mean, that statement that you just said is a great place to start. And so helping Bob understand that approach is not going to be super productive. And so, you know, he's going to say, but I need to pin this on someone. I need to fire someone. And so, you know, I think the conversation that I would have with Bob at the time is like, well, you know, I think that it's shared accountability. It's, you know, in these situations, it's never just one person acting alone. You know, it's, okay, Bob, are you responsible for that person's success? Okay, then you have to share in the blame. So are you going to fire yourself as well? You know, and so really helping them understand all of the different pieces. And so let's say, you know, for example, you know, Bob is asking me, do I need to get rid of Chris? Well, my job as the person who's doing all of the discovery is to help Bob understand the full picture of how either Chris was not given the tools to be successful. The systems were at a place one day, but then Chris has not been given the time to go back to then keep the systems updated. And so it's not to say that Chris at the end of the day was the one who pushed the buttons, but looking for someone to blame and looking for someone to fire is not productive unless during the discovery, and this has happened, I find out that Chris acted maliciously and Chris purposely set things up incorrectly. That is a scenario that happens, but it's not a common scenario. Most common is that things were set up and people walked away and moved on to other things, period. And that's the story that I would need to paint to Bob to understand it's not a Chris problem, it's an organizational problem where you're not allowing your team members enough time to maintain these systems. You have to actively carve out the time for this work to be done on a regular basis, not just once a year when you're doing your, you know, strategic planning sessions.
Okay. So I'll play I guess not devil's advocate, Bob's advocate. Bob goes, well, no, they should just know this. Like that's what we hired them for. They should just know this. Why don't they know this? Why they should be able to do this? We shouldn't need to carve out extra time. We got to be productive.
Mm-hmm. And so then it becomes a conversation of, here's everything going on. Here are all of the priorities. And so, yes, Chris may know how to do this, but Chris has not been given the time to do this. And so if you want Chris to focus on this thing, here are the 5 other things that are on his plate that need to be pushed out or might not get done. Are you okay with that? And I'm guessing Bob will be like, no, everything needs to get done. Okay, great. Then you need to hire another person. Or you need to decide that this is just not that big of a deal and you need to go shut your damn mouth. I would not say that to Bob. You know what? I can't say that. I might say that to him. It depends on how surly he's being.
I could see that. the challenge is what we call it's the pointy-haired boss problem, which is for those who don't read business cartoons, essentially anything the boss doesn't understand, the boss assumes must be easy, right? And therefore it should already be done. Given that is such an ingrained cultural thing in a lot of companies, particularly older, risk-averse companies, how do you start from a change management perspective? Can you change that? Is that a changeable thing, or is that something where, like, you know what, this is something we got to live with because this company, is the story of a 214-year-old company that was, founded at the same time the Pilgrims were setting up their log cabins. They're just, that's their culture. They are sort of set in their ways, and I guess almost at what point do you just declare it a lost cause?
Well, to pull a Chris Penn, it depends. And it depends on a lot of things, but really it depends on the people, because you can change processes, you can change platforms. Like, that's actually the easy part. Like, you can, twist knobs and flip switches and say, we're going to do it this way from now on. But unless you get people to buy in, it doesn't matter. And so it really depends on the company's readiness to change. So, to paint some broad strokes, like, let's say you have that culture where the company's been around for 214 years and the stakeholders are all above the age of 60. It's not to say that you can't make movement in terms of changing things, but historically speaking, in my experience, it's harder the longer people have been doing things. And quite honestly, there is some sort of generational, thinking around how certain things should be done. Again, that's not to say that every single person who falls into that category is going to feel that way. You may find someone who's like, you know what, we're doing it all wrong. Let's just shake it up and do it differently. That's fantastic. If you can get at least one person in that decision-making seat who is going to champion the work that you're doing, you have a better chance of getting everybody else on board, because they're like, oh, well, Bob may not agree with what we're doing, but, Susan does agree with what we're doing. And Susan, being a decision maker, can help the rest of the decision makers understand. So getting at least one champion on board at the decision maker level is going to help. And so it really comes down to, does this company even want to change? Are they ready to go through this change? Because it's not an overnight process. It's actually, it can be a painful process. It can be a slow process. The willingness to change will dictate how quickly the change happens.
In terms of analytics amnesty, then, how would you correlate the two? Like, is the willingness to change, does that go hand in hand with a willingness to declare amnesty, and not just on analytics, but on any prior change, or are they decoupled? Can you have one without the other?
You can probably have one without the other, but I don't think you're going to see it very often. And so as people, as companies have that willingness to change and do better, they are more likely to say, you know what, you're right. We weren't doing that correctly. So let's just say the past is the past. Let's start to take steps forward to correct it. Maybe we don't change everything overnight, but we start to incrementally change things. And so I do feel like you're going to see that willingness to change coupled with the ability to say, yes, I declare amnesty on that, or this is the day in which things are different. Because if you have stakeholders, decision makers, company culture carriers who are not willing to change, why would they go ahead and agree to such a large transformation? Okay.
I'm just thinking in terms of even stuff that we do internally. We have some processes and some people, me mostly, that are pain in the ass about change. Our internal project management software has been a sticking point since the founding of the company.
And you had to go there on a Monday morning.
Huh?
I said you had to go there on a Monday morning.
Oh, it's fine. But in terms of creating change, then declaring amnesty on the previous system and stuff like that,
yep.
I don't know that we have an amnesty issue in terms of like saying like, oh yeah, we're going to forget how everything used to operate. This is the way it works now. But it's still the aspect of trying to create change,
Right.
In a person to use the new system.
Well, and I think that that's where a lot of managers would get fed up and say, well, you just have to do what I'm telling you to do. No questions asked. And having been in that position when I was younger, trying to use that card, like, I know it doesn't work. Like, you might just sort of yes me to death and then eventually be like, okay, well, she's kind of impossible to work with. So I'm just going to start doing my own thing and kind of just move on and distance myself. And so it starts to break down the professional relationship that you and I have built on trust and respect if I start to behave that way toward you. So, in the scenario, one of the ways to get around it, one of the ways to work with the challenges is to sort of do that risk assessment. And so here's what happens if we do nothing. Here's what happens if we make a big change. And then is there somewhere in the middle that we can meet? And so helping you understand maybe from my perspective why I feel we need this thing, and then me understanding from your perspective what your workflow is. And then ultimately it's only going to be successful if we're both willing to do the work. And in this hypothetical scenario, I have not yet found that the other party is willing to hold up their end of the bargain. And so therefore, we have not found the right change. The change management isn't working because not everybody's participating in the way in which they agreed upon.
Okay. In terms of analytics amnesty, going back to what we were talking about earlier, one of the things you said was sort of making a gradual transition from the way, instead of trying to make a big change overnight. The math nerd in me doesn't particularly like that, because it's like we're going from wrong to slightly less wrong, as opposed to going from wrong to correct. How do you navigate that so that you're achieving the level of correctness you need? Like, all of your goals and goal values in Google Analytics are totally wrong. I have a hard time stomaching the idea of, well, now it's just less wrong, right? Like a little bit less wrong, but still mostly wrong from an analytics perspective as opposed to the people perspective. How do you find that balance?
Well, I mean, think about change in your own life as a person. And I know that this is the part that you don't want to hear, but it really does come back to the people. So the math is the math is the math. Like, that's not going to change. That's the constant. That's the thing that you have control over. But if I told you, okay, Chris, I'm going to need you to put on 50 pounds by tomorrow, and I need you to overhaul your diet today, immediately, do all of these things differently, everything you've ever known is completely changed, your reaction would probably be like, well, wait a minute, that's a lot of change all at once. I'm kind of overwhelmed. Why do I have to do it this way? Can't I do it a little bit more gradually? And so that's sort of the same reaction that people tend to have when you're overhauling things that they're used to seeing. Especially the longer things have been wrong, the harder it's going to be to get people over that hump of that transition of this is everything new. People might be excited, like, I want to do this thing, but you still need to give them time to adjust to here's what's new. And so that's not saying you can't go ahead and fix everything in the system all at once so that they're having brand new data all at once. But the way in which that data is then re-rolled out and reintroduced and re-educated, if you try to do all of that at once, then at some point people are just going to check out and stop listening and doing the Macarena in their head and not even hearing the words that you're saying. And you're going to be in this constant re-education piece in this loop for a longer time because you didn't give the people enough time to really adjust to what's new. So in that scenario, you're saying, let's say all the goals and goal values in Google Analytics, we found out that they're all incorrect. Well, I would say we first need to figure out, well, how many of them are there? And are they all one business line? Are they a bunch of different business lines? How off are they? And then you start to prioritize. And that's going to be uncomfortable for you as the person fixing it, but it's even more uncomfortable for the person who has to get the new set of information and talk through the data, because you may not be in those meetings where the data is being presented as the person fixing the information. So the person who's actually responsible for communicating the information also needs that time to adjust. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I think because I think you hit on something really important there. If the company doesn't have a data-driven culture, then it won't stick. If you said to me, you have to lose, 50 pounds and change over your diet today, and I
Hmm.
said, why? And you told me, because otherwise you will be dead in a year. I'm like, shit, I guess I better go do that because I want to live longer than a year. And so there's
Hmm.
a tremendous high value need and urgency. Like, okay, yes, I would like to live longer than a year. So I will make these changes immediately and just nod my head and go along with it.
Hmm.
Whereas if I tell you, for example, your goals and goal values in Google Analytics are completely wrong, you won't be able to forecast anything. You're like, we don't forecast anything anyways, and we just guess, and things are fine. Then there's no longer any sense of urgency. And even though, from an analytics perspective, I'd say, well, then why are you even bothering with analytics? How do you then? Can you create that sense of urgency and perhaps fear, or do you need to pivot the company's culture first to be more data driven so that they understand the value of this thing before you can even explain why they need to change it?
You need to start with the culture and really understanding what it is they even care about. And so if they don't care about the data at all, okay, then that's not the conversation you have. The conversation you then have is, around customer satisfaction, for example. We know that there is still data behind that. They may not care. But if you position it in a way in around the things they care about, revenue, reputation, satisfaction, whatever the thing is, or employee retention, or, you know, snacks in the break room. Well, guess what? You can continue to have snacks in the break room if you fix this thing. And then you can start to connect the dots, because if you fix this thing, you will then have more money, because you're forecasting accurately, and therefore you have more money to buy snacks for the break room. Wouldn't you like those chocolate covered pretzels? And so you have to find the thing that the person cares about. So, for example, when I was in my 20s, I was a smoker. I smoked pack and a half, 2 packs a day. I knew logically that smoking was really bad for me, but emotionally, I didn't care. And so I had to find an emotional reason to quit, despite the logic that I understood about the harmful effects of smoking. And, eventually I did quit, and I've not been a smoker for more than 15 years. But until I could make that emotional connection to why I needed to stop doing a certain thing, it didn't matter if I knew all the reasons in the world. I knew smoking could kill me. I knew I could get lung cancer, emphysema. I've seen the pictures of damaged lungs. Like, I knew all the things. I knew that most of my pocket money was going to buying cigarettes for no good reason. I knew that my clothes smelled. I knew all of those things, and yet I didn't have that emotional connection to wanting to quit. And so that's one of the things about change management, is you have to meet people where they are and find out what they care about and what they're going to connect to. Because just telling them, like, okay, you have to change this because it's going to be better for the company. Well, I don't care about the company. I don't even own the company. Why do I need to change a thing? It's not going to increase my paycheck. Why do I care?
But doesn't that create a paradox? Analytics amnesty should be really easy in a company that doesn't care about their analytics. It's like, yeah, sure, whatever, change it. It doesn't matter. Whereas if you have somebody who's deeply invested, like, no, you can't change anything because my bonus relies on this information. You're telling me that everything that we've been reporting is wrong, and the company might even claw back my bonus. How do you balance that where you've now created the urgency but made analytics amnesty harder?
I think it's okay that the process to get to analytics amnesty is harder if people care, if they are willing to do the work. In the scenario of, they don't care, okay, they don't care. Maybe they will never change, and that's okay too. It's hard for the people who want to make the change, and that's you and I, Chris. But if the company itself doesn't care, then let's not waste our time. You can't make people care about something. They have to get to that on their own. You can present to them all of the different options of things that they should care about, but if they're never going to care, then that's fine. It's not worth our time to try to fix the thing. And then they can do with that information what they will. We've done our job of giving them all of the tools to success to say, if you do this thing, this will happen. If you fix this, here's the positive things, but here's also the negative side if you don't do it. And if they still don't care, that's fine. Then they don't need to change. I mean, and that's just the end of it. Like, there will be some scenarios where the change does not work because people don't care, and that's okay. So you let them not change. I mean, we see this every day, in our society. Like, people don't care. They don't care about the numbers. They don't care about all the things that are going on around them. It does not change their opinions on these larger global situations, like, because they have not yet had that emotional connection to why they should be doing something.
As usual, people are the problem.
But that really is sort of the core of what we are trying to educate around with change management. You and I, we can, make the most efficient process. We can build the most, shiny, pristine systems that collect the most amazing data. But if there's nobody who cares about it, it doesn't matter. And it even goes into, I'll sort of take it a step farther with, okay, let's say you remove the people and just have the machines do all the work. Well, spoiler, guess who programs the machines? Guess who has to make sure the machines are still plugged in? Guess who still has to oil the wheels to make sure that everything is turning around in the machine? The people that we hate so much.
Well, I hate so much. You like people.
I do. Generally. Some days. Generally.
Well, if you've got comments or questions or thoughts about change management projects that you've been a part of and how successful or not they were, drop us a line. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, where you and over 2,200 other marketers are asking and answering each other's questions all day long and sharing your stories about analytics and change management and stuff. And wherever it is you watch or listen to this episode of the show, if there's a platform you'd rather get it on instead, chances are most of them are available at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, where you can find out the show in the format that suits you best. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.